March 27th, 1836, Palm Sunday. The sleepy Texian prisoners of Goliad are prodded awake from their slumber by their Mexican guards. Hermann Ehrenberg, a German volunteer captured at Coleto Creek, feels a peculiar tenseness in the crisp, cool morning air. As they exit the barracks, he sees an entire army of uniformed men watching their every move, more than what is usually needed to guard them. Once out in the courtyard, the prisoners are lined up and told they are leaving. A few try to ask where they are heading, but no answer is forthcoming. Once the prisoners are mustered, the order to march is sounded and the column of Texians begin their quiet procession from the Presidio. As they leave the gates, the column diverges and heads in three different directions. As the Texians march from Goliad, many anxiously hope they are finally heading for home, leaving this wretched country once and for all. As he marches, Ehrenberg studies his captors and notices something strange. The guards are not carrying any camping gear, a sure sign of a long march. After about 15 minutes of marching, the officer in command calls the column to a halt, confusing the prisoners. Bewildered by the order, the prisoners look at each other in astonishment. "Why are we stopping here?" they ask each other, but nobody has an answer. During the confusion, a muffled volley is heard, filling the air with apprehension. The Mexican guards form a line facing the prisoners. Soon, another command comes from the officer. "Preparen." Unable to speak Spanish, the Texians try to discern the officer's intentions, but to no avail. Then, just as the officer issues his next command, "Apunten!" a closer, more distinct volley thunders nearby, accompanied by the cries of dying men. Chills run down Ehrenberg's back as he realizes what is happening. He and the other prisoners turn around to see their Mexican captors aiming their muskets at them. With their hearts racing and eyes wide open, the Texians witness the officer raise his sword. Once he is ready, the officer throws his arm down and shouts, "Fuego!" Today's video is sponsored by NordVPN, a regular and trusted sponsor of the channel. You can get NordVPN today by clicking on my link nordvpn.com/warhawk down in the description. I never venture online without using NordVPN. I always want to keep my information safe from malware, trackers, and ads as I surf the internet. All the traffic I generate online is protected with robust encryption, ensuring my data is completely safe from prying eyes. Thanks to NordVPN, if my information is ever leaked, I will be notified immediately and can use Nord's kill switch if it is ever exposed. That is a wonder of NordVPN. At the moment, NordVPN is having a special offer where if you sign up with NordVPN today, you will receive 4 extra months on a 2-year plan. If you're still not satisfied with the service, you are guaranteed your money back within 30 days of your purchase. So go ahead, get NordVPN today and see how it protects your data as you surf the internet. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. If you want to get NordVPN today, you can get it by clicking on my link nordvpn.com/warhawk down in the description. On February 18th, 1836, almost a week after Santa Anna's army crosses into Texas, Brigadier General Jose de Urrea begins his part to rid the northern frontier of these land pirates. Urrea, a talented 38-year-old general from Durango, has been in the military for almost 3 decades. In 1833, seeing the constant rise of Santa Anna, Urrea wisely allied himself with a popular general, enabling him to boost his own career in the process. When Santa Anna became president, he rewarded Urrea with a commission as a brigadier general in the Mexican army. In early 1836, as Santa Anna is marching his army north to deal with the rebellious Anglos in Texas, he diverts Urrea's division to deal with the massed Texian force threatening Matamoros. However, just as the general arrives in the river town, the threats of a Texian attack dissipates as the enemy force develops into petty infighting. opening the road for a drive north into Texas. With no organized force threatening Matamoros, Santa Anna orders Urrea to begin his own invasion of the rebellious state. Urrea is tasked with sweeping the coastal prairie clean of Texian rebels, as the president leaves a path of destruction through the heart of the state. Santa Anna gives his subordinate clear orders to execute any rebels he captures. He's determined to send a clear message to those who stand in his way. With 400 men under his command, Urrea prepares his force to march north. Standing in Urrea's way are the remaining men of the failed Matamoros Expedition, around 70 men under the command of Colonel Francis Frank Johnson in San Patricio. Ever since the expedition collapsed from infighting, Johnson hoped to salvage the remains of the campaign and launch his own attack upon the river town. However, Johnson is waiting for Federalists and Matamoros to rise up and assist him in conquering the town. Until that happens, Johnson divides up his force to collect supplies and rounds up wild mustangs from the surrounding prairies. On February 18th, Urrea's army crosses the Rio Grande and marches straight towards San Patricio. As he marches north, his spies keep him updated on the Texians in the vicinity. 8 days later, on the 26th, Urrea learns that Johnson only has 30 men with him in San Patricio. Seeing an opportunity to defeat the Texians in detail, he force marches his command overnight in the driving rain to surprise the rebels the next morning, even losing a few men to exposure. Despite the losses, his rapid approach reaps dividends. Early on the 27th, Urrea's command catches Johnson's men completely off guard, killing and capturing many while scattering the rest. Luckily, Johnson and a few others escaped the sudden and ferocious attack. In a short, decisive fight, Urrea reclaims Fort Lepantalan from the Texian rebels and now has a perfect staging ground to move towards Goliad. Before he moves that way, Urrea receives reports of some of Johnson's men returning to the town, unaware that the Mexicans captured San Patricio. With this information, Urrea prepares an ambush along Agua Dulce Creek, about 26 miles south of San Patricio. On March 2nd, the oblivious Texians, driving a herd of wild horses, ride right into Urrea's trap. At the prearranged signal, Mexican dragoons sweep out from the woods and destroy the detachment almost to a man. The few who survive ride straight to Fannin to report the attack. With these twin victories at the battles of San Patricio and Agua Dulce Creek, Urrea has annihilated Johnson's command, cleared the Nueces River Valley of Texian forces, and enabled Centralists to retake control of the region. As word gets around about Urrea's victories, loyalist rancheros flock to his banner, all wanting to drive those despised Norte Americanos out of Mexico. Not only have these twin battles broken the Texian hold over the valley, they have also proven that the riflemen can be easily defeated if caught in the open by Mexican cavalry, a tactic that Urrea would try to replicate in the future. The man who can stop Urrea's victorious march up the coast is Colonel James W. Fannin Jr., in command of 450 men, the largest Texian force at Fort Defiance in Goliad. Fannin, a 32-year-old Georgian, was an early participant of the revolution. He joined the fighting when it started at Gonzales and was active during the siege of Behar. Thanks to his West Point education, he easily rose through the ranks of the volunteer army. After the successful capture of Behar, Fannin transferred to the regular army to become the second highest ranking officer just behind Houston. With a West Point education and battle experience, the people of Texas expect Fannin to lead his men to victory. When Fannin receives news of the twin defeats near San Patricio, the colonel feels a heavy responsibility rests upon him. Though he recognizes Goliad as a key position in the Texian defensive line, recent events have made his position untenable. With Santa Anna in command of Behar and the Texian garrison at the Alamo cut off, Urrea marching up the coast, and the potential of another Mexican force landing at Capano Bay in his rear, Fannin realizes his command at Goliad is outflanked and outnumbered. Fannin knows he must act, but he is unsure of what he should do. His gut tells him to retreat, but he refuses to move without explicit orders from a higher authority. Luckily for Fannin, he does not have to wait long. While the Constitutional Convention is setting up a government for the new Texas Republic, the delegates once again choose General Houston as the commander-in-chief of all Texian forces. With Houston as the undisputed commander, Fannin finally has somebody to tell him what to do. On March 6, Houston orders Fannin to join him at Gonzales. With his position at Fort Defiance deteriorating rapidly, he's more than ready to abandon the post. Houston, who wants to make a stand on the Colorado River, is depending on Fannin and his troops to join him as soon as possible. However, Fannin will not be joining Houston anytime soon. On March 11th, realizing the danger to civilians due to Urrea's aggressive advance, Fannin dispatches Captain Amon B. King's company of 30 men to evacuate civilians from Refugio. King and his men arrive in town the next day and waste time chasing loyalist rancheros. When reports come back about the clashes with Urrea's cavalry, Fannin sends Lieutenant Colonel William Ward and 80 men of his Georgia battalion to assist King, who arrives in Refugio the next day. If the Texians gather up the civilians and leave as soon as possible, they will be able to rejoin Fannin in Goliad, but that is not to be. Instead of leaving, King decides to chase random groups of Centralists in the surrounding area, delaying the Texian withdrawal enough for Urrea to arrive with the bulk of his force, which has risen to 1,200 men. On the morning of March 14th, Urrea attacks Ward's Georgians at Refugio, driving them back to Mission Rosario in the town. Seeing the enemy fortify themselves behind the crumbling mission walls, Urrea brings up his artillery to make a breach for his infantry. As his artillery shells the old mission compound, the infantry forms up to attack. Once his infantry is ready, Urrea unleashes the men upon the mission walls. Yet, despite the massive numerical advantage, Refugio will be a repeat of many of the war's previous battles, entrenched Texian riflemen shredding the advancing Mexican infantry. The gallant Mexican soldiers attack 3 different times, but each assault is bloodily repulsed. Any unit that tries to get close to the mission perimeter melts away in the face of Texian rifle fire. The farthest any Mexican unit reaches is the stone walls. Those who survived the fight said the ground in front of the walls was littered with the dead and dying. Unable to break the Texian position, Urrea pulls his men back and resumes his bombardment. During the subsequent bombardment, King returns to the town only to run into the rear of Urrea's force. Surprised to find Urrea in Refugio, King tries to break through the Mexican force to the mission, but after a few hours of fighting, they run out of ammunition and surrender. After an entire day of fighting, Ward still holds on to his tenuous position at Mission Rosario, but his ammunition is dangerously low. Neither Texian commander expected a general engagement with the enemy and did not bring a sufficient supply of ammunition. With the surrender of King, Urrea demands Ward to surrender as well, but the Georgians refuse to budge. Incensed at the refusal, Urrea reveals his entire force, hoping to intimidate the rebels into surrendering. Undeterred, Ward simply responds by saying, "The Georgians will not surrender." Refusing to yield, Ward and his men sneak out of Refugio in the early morning of March 15th. The Georgians make their way east along the coast to avoid detection from Mexican troops, hoping to link up with Fannin. When the sun rises, Urrea finds that the rebels have escaped his clutches. King, on the other hand, is not so lucky. He and his men are brought back to Urrea, who has them executed the next day. Not only did King and Ward fail to evacuate the civilians from the area, but they also had their commands destroyed by Urrea. With the Texians in the vicinity taken care of, Urrea presses on towards his ultimate goal, Goliad. While King and Ward are hunted down by Urrea's unrelenting force, Fannin receives another order from Houston to make haste to Victoria, along with disastrous news that the Alamo and the entire garrison have been destroyed. Despite the commanded urgency by Houston, Fannin wastes valuable time in Goliad waiting for his subordinates to return from their mission at Refugio. As time passes, Fannin becomes more anxious about obeying Houston's order to retreat. On March 17th, Fannin finally receives reports that Ward has been defeated. With no other delays, Fannin prepares his command to link up with Houston on the Colorado River. On the 18th, Mexican patrols arrive in the region around Goliad, forcing Fannin to delay his march till night. If Fannin and his men want to safely reach Houston, they need to travel as lightly as possible. Fannin, on the other hand, insists on bringing 9 pieces of artillery and 500 spare muskets, contrary to Houston's orders. Yet, when night comes, it proves to be too murky for Fannin's liking, who postponed the march until morning, a fatal decision. When light comes the next day, a low fog looms over the area, a great concealment for his army if Fannin uses it to his advantage. However, true to his character, he delays his march even longer. Not wanting to leave anything behind for the Mexicans, Fannin orders his men to burn anything they are not taking, producing a great tower of smoke, a sure sign of a retreating enemy. When Mexican patrols see the smoke hanging high over Goliad, they race to tell Urrea of Fannin's departure. It is mid-morning when Fannin's men finally depart Fort Defiance, but despite being in a race against time, Fannin's column moves at a snail's pace east towards Victoria. As the Texians march, they discover to their disgust that nobody packed their supply of food. Upon receiving the reports of Fannin's army leaving Goliad, Urrea races after the fleeing Texians with his cavalry, hoping to catch them in the open. As the two continue the race east, Fannin makes another fatal decision. After only advancing 6 miles from Goliad, he halts his command to allow the oxen to rest. Fannin's subordinates urge him to keep moving until they reach Coleto Creek, but to no avail. Fannin, who is present at Gonzales, Concepcion, and Behar, holds an unshakable contempt for the Mexican soldiers, believing that even his own small force can stand up to Urrea's numerically superior army. Yet, at each of those battles, the Texians had adequate cover, Fannin was not in command, and they did not face a commander like Urrea. Just after noon, Fannin resumes the march and nears Coleto Creek. As he comes within 2 miles of the creek, he looks over his shoulder and sees rising dust clouds in the distance. Urrea is coming. Urrea's advanced guarded cavalry catches Fannin's men 1 mile from the wooded bottomlands of Coleto Creek, not wanting to allow the Texian riflemen to enjoy the protection of the trees. Urrea's cavalry circles around Fannin's force and blocks their approach to the timber. Seeing this, Fannin forms up his force into a hollow square and unlimbers the artillery at every corner. Once again, Fannin's subordinates urge their commander to move quickly to the protection of the timber, but Fannin opts to fight Urrea in the open. Doing whatever it takes to keep the Texians in the open, Urrea prepares his dragoons to attack. The dragoons dismount and march toward the isolated rebels, firing every quarter mile, doing no damage. Fannin, on the other hand, waits until the dragoons get within point-blank range before firing, and driving out the attackers with an accurate volley. As the two sides trade shots, Fannin's cavalry returns to the field to see the infantry trapped in the open. Not wanting to waste more lives to rejoin their comrades, the cavalry rides on to Victoria to find reinforcements, leaving them to their fate. The Mexican dragoons, now remounted, continued their unrelenting attack against Fannin Square, each time being driven off by deadly rifle fire. As the fighting continues, more infantry arrives from Urrea's army, taking the high ground to fire into the Texian position. Once the infantry arrives, Urrea throws them into the fray as well. Despite the courage of the Texian infantry, their artillerymen and draft animals are picked off at an alarming rate by the Mexican cazadores. During one of their volleys, Fannin himself is wounded in the thigh. Despite many times questioning his military judgment, Fannin's men approve of his bravery in the battle. Captain John Shackelford, the commander of the Alabama Red Rovers, wrote that the Mexicans came in full tilt, with gleaming lances, shouting like Indians. When they came into range, we opened a tremendous fire upon them, which brought them to a full halt and swept them down by scores. The two sides would continue to trade volleys until darkness suspended the fighting. When night finally arrives, the Texians realize how dangerously low they are on supplies. Many soldiers share their last drops of water with their wounded comrades. Meanwhile, Fannin and his officers review the situation. Though they had beaten back every assault by Urrea's troops, they are trapped in the open without food or supplies. While the Texians try to rest, they are occasionally shot at by Mexican cazadores, preventing them from starting campfires. Realizing the severity of the situation, Fannin finally allows his men to decide if they want to stay or break out of the trap. Knowing that the wounded would be left behind if they escape, the men decide to remain and share their fate. With their decision made, the men try to get what sleep they can. On March 20th, the morning light only further increases the gravity of the situation for the Texians. During the night, Urrea brought his entire force to the field, including 3 pieces of artillery. Now with superior firepower, the Mexicans only need to hang back and bombard the stranded Texians. After firing a few rounds into the Texian square, the desperate Fannin, unable to continue the fight, raises a white flag and calls for a ceasefire. Once negotiations commence, Urrea can only offer unconditional surrender to the desperate Texians. Isolated in the middle of the field without supplies, Fannin can do little more than accept. The tired and hungry Texians lay down their arms and march back to Goliad under guard. Again, Urrea proves that the superior Texian riflemen can be defeated if they are caught in the open. Though he suffered more killed and wounded than the Texians, Urrea's aggressive actions against Fannin have rendered him a complete victory on the Texas coast. The next day, Urrea pushes on the Victoria, reclaiming the town for Mexico. On the 22nd, the Mexicans captured the remnants of Ward's Georgia Battalion, who were found cornered against the banks of the Guadalupe River. Wanting to continue his drive eastward, Urrea leaves the prisoners with Colonel Jose Nicolas de la Portilla at Goliad, the same place they once garrisoned. For Fannin and the Texian prisoners, their war is over. Now they look forward to going back home to see their families. Continuing his push east is not the only reason Urrea left the prisoners in Goliad. Urrea knows Santa Anna wants these men dead and has no intention of obeying that order. Urrea respects Fannin and his men for their courage in battle and has no desire to execute them. Instead of following Santa Anna's orders, Urrea writes to his commanding general asking for clemency on the behalf of the Texians. However, when Santa Anna receives the message, he doubles down on the order by demanding the immediate execution of the perfidious foreigners. With this, the fate of Fannin and his men is sealed. On March 26, when Santa Anna's execution order arrives at Goliad, Portilla, although perturbed about the thought of killing the prisoners, decides to act upon his commanding general's order. Unlike the Mexicans, the Texians have no suspicion of their fate. Many believe they will be paroled back to the United States or marched to Matamoros. Fannin, who has been in communication with the Mexican officers about their arrangements, believes the same thing. As night arrives, the Texian prisoners sing Home Sweet Home, a cherished song in the United States. At sunrise on Palm Sunday, March 27, 1836, 370 Texians are formed up in 3 different columns and are marched under guard in separate directions. The largest group, mostly containing Ward's Georgians, heads north toward the San Antonio River. Another group, containing mainly men from the San Antonio and Mobile Grays, march east towards Victoria. Finally, Ira Westover's group marches west towards San Patricio. Once the prisoners reach a designated spot about a half a mile away from the fort, they are halted where they stand. Once the order is given, the Mexican soldiers aim their rifles and methodically gun down the Texian prisoners at point-blank range. Those who are wounded are finished off with bayonets and knives. Those who survive try to run or hide the best they can. Meanwhile, around 40 wounded men are executed within the confines of the fort. Fannin, forced to watch his men be massacred, is the last to be executed. Once it is his turn, he is brought into the courtyard, blindfolded, and seated in front of a firing squad. Before his death, Fannin requests that his belongings be returned to his family, that he is shot in the heart and given a Christian burial. Instead, the soldiers took his belongings, shot him in the face, and burned his body with his men. Once the massacre is over 400 Texians were executed that day. While 28 men escaped the slaughter, dozens more, such as Captain Shackelford, are spared to serve as doctors or laborers for the Mexican army. Once the Texians are killed, their bodies are piled up and burned. As news spread about the Goliad Massacre, joining the already terrifying report of the destruction of the Alamo, Anglo-American civilians flee east towards the United States in droves, taking anything they can carry with them and burning the rest. With the Alamo and Goliad garrisons destroyed, no fortification stands between Santa Ana and the Sabine River. The fate of the young republic now solely rests in the hands of Sam Houston. If the general is unable to defeat this unrelenting Mexican tide, the Republic of Texas, not even a month old, might be destroyed before it can be fully established. For now, Houston can do little but retreat in the face of Santa Ana's victorious armies. With every step east the Texians take, the bigger the fire of vengeance for their butchered comrades burns in their hearts, hoping to one day show their hated foe that they remember those who fell at the Alamo and at Goliad.